At that time, Yuma couldn't even begin to imagine that one day, he would be fighting alongside them. Somehow, he managed to get into a university. He had no real goals. No dreams he wanted to chase. Instead, he simply drifted through each day. He passed the time. And for him, that was enough. Then one day, while casually walking, a feather drifted down and landed on his head. And then, everything changed. Without warning, a hole suddenly opened beneath his feet. Before he could react, he was swallowed by the darkness below. A voice echoed through the void. "Rise, chosen ones." When Yuma opened his eyes, he immediately wondered where he was. More importantly, who were all the people standing around him? Before anyone could speak, an authoritative voice demanded silence. The man then introduced himself as Burke van Gardgul, king of the Gardgul Empire. The king wasted no time. He informed them that they had been summoned as chosen heroes. Then he asked for their help in defeating the demon lord and his army. Hearing that, Yuma quietly muttered that he wanted to go home. After all, he hated anything frightening. Then one of the summoned people raised a question. What exactly would they gain from helping? Yuma couldn't believe it. How could someone speak to a king so casually? Before the king could answer, a long-haired man stepped forward. Naturally, he said, they would receive proper treatment and rewards. Furthermore, they would be taught the lost arts once used by heroes of old. Through those arts, they could earn the blessings of the gods themselves. However, the summoned man immediately replied that if those blessings were useless, he would simply go home. The long-haired man calmly responded, "This way, please." Yuma stared in disbelief. How could that guy speak so confidently? More importantly, Yuma wished the summoned man would stop pushing the conversation forward on his own. That was what he really wanted to say. Meanwhile, seeing the fierce expressions of both the king and the knights, Yuma quietly muttered that there was no way out of this. And so, the story of the cowardly Yuma began. A short while later, the long-haired man led everyone to an altar. This was where the rituals would be performed. Kur stared at the structure before him. The only thing he could say was that it looked like something straight out of a fantasy world. Then another voice greeted them. She introduced herself as Edna Hans, the Grand Priest. Edna explained that they would now begin the ritual that would grant them the blessings of the gods. After that, she instructed everyone to step forward one at a time. The boastful man immediately volunteered to go first. As he entered the magic circle, the ritual began. Several moments later, the results were announced. The god of flame, the divine judge of sins, had bestowed upon him the flames of hell. Next came another summoned individual. This time, the Shenron of memories granted him the power of ice. As the ritual continued, everything unfolded far more normally than Yuma had expected. One after another, each person received their own blessing. Watching from the side, Yuma silently prayed. He wished for a blessing that could protect him from all harm. Then his name was called. Instantly, panic took over. It was his turn. His heart felt as though it was about to leap straight out of his mouth. As he nervously walked forward, one of the summoned people noticed something strange. Yuma's arms and legs were moving perfectly in sync. At the same time, someone else noticed a feather falling from him onto the floor. Soon, the ritual was complete. Edna then announced the result. The god of healing had bestowed upon Yuma the power of revival. For a moment, Yuma processed her words. Healing. Revival. Then realization struck him. That still meant he would have to get hurt first. Another man approached the summoned heroes and praised their blessings. As expected of heroes, he said, every one of their gifts was truly extraordinary. He then offered his gratitude to the gods for their blessings. Afterward, he prayed for the health and safety of the summoned heroes before inviting them to a luxurious feast. Meanwhile, Yuma remained lost in thought. Healing. Revival. The words continued to linger in his mind. What if he still had to fight? He hated pain. And more than that, he was an anxious person by nature. As those thoughts swirled in his head, Edna quietly watched him from a distance. Soon, everyone entered the dining hall. The man encouraged them to eat as much as they wanted and enjoy everything that had been prepared for them. The moment Yuma saw the spread before him, his eyes sparkled. Seeing the countless dishes laid out across the tables, he suddenly felt a little more motivated. Maybe he could do his best for this world after all. While he was eating, someone called out to him. The person asked if his name was Yuma. Yuma nodded in confirmation. The speaker introduced himself as Keita Akanishi, the same boastful man from earlier. Keita bluntly commented that Yuma's blessing didn't sound particularly useful in battle. Then Takuya Araki joined the conversation. He pointed out that there were already too many people suited for the front lines, so perhaps things would balance themselves out. Katomi quickly agreed. In fact, she was glad someone had received a healing-type blessing. Having a capable healer in the back line would be incredibly valuable. When the time came, she said, they would definitely need Yuma's help. Hearing that, Yuma quietly reflected on their words. They were already treating him as a non-combatant. Still, he didn't really mind. In fact, he was relieved. If he could avoid fighting directly, that would be ideal. Although a small part of him felt somewhat guilty, he quickly brushed the thought aside. After all, support roles were important too. Tomorrow, he would dedicate himself to practicing healing magic as much as possible. Later that night, Edna met with several individuals behind closed doors. The preparations were complete. Everything could proceed tomorrow. She then reminded them that Yuma was someone precious. Because of that, they needed to be extremely careful when handling him. One of the men nodded. He understood. The following morning, a knock sounded at Yuma's door. After opening it, he found the bespectacled man standing outside. Yuma immediately asked if something was wrong. The man adjusted his glasses before explaining. There was something he wished to discuss. The kingdom was currently engaged in a war against the demon lord. As a result, their supply of medicine had become critically insufficient. Since Yuma possessed the power of revival, they hoped he could help treat the wounded. Without hesitation, Yuma agreed. If there was something he could do, he would gladly help. Hearing his answer, the bespectacled man thanked him. Yuma himself felt strangely happy. He was finally being given a role. He was finally being useful. The man then handed him a set of clothes. He suggested that Yuma change into them since the work ahead would likely get messy. After changing, Yuma examined the outfit. For some reason, it resembled hospital clothing. The observation left him slightly uneasy. Even so, he followed the man deeper into the facility. As they approached a certain room, a strange feeling crept into his chest. The atmosphere felt wrong, oppressive. It gave him a bad feeling. The moment he stepped inside, that feeling only intensified. Then he was instructed to sit down. Confused, Yuma obediently took a seat. He then asked what exactly he was supposed to do for the injured people. Before anyone answered, a powerful force suddenly shoved him down into the chair. Then the bespectacled man calmly explained the situation. They would be using Yuma's flesh and blood. For a moment, Yuma couldn't understand what he had just heard. His mind went blank. Flesh and blood? What did that even mean? Before he could ask, several people grabbed hold of him. His arms were restrained. Straps tightened around his wrists. Yuma's eyes widened. He had no idea what was happening. No idea what they were planning to do. Then he saw it. The bespectacled man slowly produced a sharp knife. Moments later, he revealed a large syringe. Yuma stared at the instruments in horror. Nothing made sense. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. All he knew was that fear was rapidly consuming him. The bespectacled man calmly told Yuma to relax. According to him, Yuma possessed the blessing of immortality. No wound could kill him. No poison could claim his life. No matter what happened to his body, he would always survive. That meant his body contained everything necessary to recover from any injury inflicted upon it. Hearing that did nothing to ease Yuma's fear. His voice trembled as he desperately asked them to wait. At the very least, they could start by taking blood samples. There was no need to rush into something this extreme. Besides, what if they were mistaken? What if their assumptions about his blessing were wrong? Before he could finish speaking, a man suddenly swung a blade. In an instant, Yuma's hand was severed. For a moment he simply stared. His detached hand lay on the floor before him. Then reality struck. A blood-curdling scream erupted from his throat. The bespectacled man watched him carefully. Did it hurt? Or was he simply frightened? Either way, the man repeatedly reminded him to calm down. After all, he wasn't going to die. But Yuma couldn't stop screaming. He couldn't stop shaking. Eventually, the man slapped him across the face. The sharp impact echoed through the room. Then he repeated himself once more. Yuma would not die. As the panic continued to consume him, Yuma suddenly noticed something strange. Something was happening to his arm. At first, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Then his eyes widened. His severed limb was growing back. Before his very eyes, flesh, muscle, bone, and skin rapidly reconstructed themselves. Moments later, his arm was completely restored. The bespectacled man picked up the severed hand and examined it with fascination. The results had exceeded even his superior's expectations. Watching the scene unfold, Yuma finally understood something. This was only his second day in another world. And somehow, his Ice-Sky life had already been set to hard mode. Then the man casually announced the next phase. Now, they would move on to testing drugs. Elsewhere, two men discussed the results of the experiment. Both were astonished. At last, they had obtained an immortal being. Something they had sought for a very long time. Perhaps now they could finally deal with a certain monster that had continued to plague them. Meanwhile, the scene shifted elsewhere. A woman with bandages wrapped around her neck quietly muttered to herself. The child was still alive. More importantly, she was holding a single feather. The same feather that had appeared alongside Yuma. She stared at it thoughtfully. Of all things, why a feather? What exactly was happening outside? As she pondered the question, another scene emerged. A distant memory. A A familiar voice called out to Yuma. Did you hear? Yamada said he's going to marry his girlfriend after graduation. The voice chuckled before continuing. You're about to start your second year of university, right? You should probably start thinking about your future. For Yuma, however, the answer had always been simple. His future was whatever happened next. If something happened, it happened. If nothing happened, that was fine too. That was enough for him. Then the dream began to change. At first, he was peacefully enjoying a meal. But little by little, the scene twisted into something horrifying. The dining table disappeared. The warmth vanished. This is marvelous. You should be proud. You will serve the people this way forever. The words echoed endlessly. Yuma jolted awake. Gasping for air, he shot upright from his bed. A violent cough escaped his throat. His body trembled as panic flooded through him. For several moments, he could only breathe. Then he realized it had only been a dream, yet the relief didn't last long. Memories quickly returned. He had fainted during the experiments again. Which meant only one thing. Now that he was awake, the experiments would begin again. Yuma clenched his fists. He was sick of it. Day after day. Over and over. The pain never stopped. The tests never ended. At some point, he had even lost track of time. He no longer knew how many days had passed since he arrived in this world. Then he heard it, slowly approaching from somewhere beyond the hallway. Yuma immediately tensed. His heart began pounding against his chest. They were coming. The thought alone made his stomach twist. Yet as the footsteps drew closer, another possibility crossed his mind. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe it was only a patrol passing by. Maybe, just this once, the footsteps weren't coming for him. The moment Yuma saw the shadow of a foot outside his door, terror overwhelmed him. He immediately buried his face into the bed. His shoulders shook. Quiet sobs escaped his lips as he desperately begged for someone, anyone, to save him. Then something strange happened. A mysterious magic circle suddenly appeared above him. Yuma froze. The glowing ring slowly descended and began wrapping itself around his body. Confusion replaced fear. He had no idea what was happening. Outside the room, one of the men paused. He thought he had heard an unusual sound. Curious, they opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty. Yuma had vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, Yuma slowly opened his eyes. He found himself lying beneath a large tree. The sight before him was completely unfamiliar. His eyes widened in surprise. At the same time, back at the mansion, the other summoned heroes were spending their evening as usual. While moving a chess piece across the board, Takuya remarked that it was surprising this world even had chess. Across from him, Keita immediately raised his voice. He demanded another match. Takuya could only smile wryly. It seemed Keita absolutely hated losing. Nearby, Kotomi watched the two boys with amusement. Even after returning from dungeon exploration, they still had endless energy. Then she glanced toward the window. It was already getting late. She reminded them that dinner time was approaching and suggested they head to the cafeteria. Unfortunately, neither boy appeared to be listening. Takuya nodded anyway. It sounded like a good idea. They could simply continue the match after eating. Keita quickly agreed. As long as there was meat involved. That was all that mattered to him. Meanwhile, as Kotomi walked through the hallway, she noticed several men hurriedly conversing among themselves. Curious, she approached them and asked if something had happened. One of the priests immediately answered. There would be an important conference soon, so everyone was in a rush preparing for it. He politely told her not to worry about it. Kotomi nodded. Working so late sounded exhausting. She wished them well and told them to take care of themselves. Once she left, the priest's expression changed. His tone became much colder. Under no circumstances, he ordered, were the summoned heroes allowed to learn about this matter. One of his subordinates reported that they had already searched nearly everywhere. The only location they had yet to investigate was the labyrinth. The priest clicked his tongue in irritation. What a troublesome subject Yuma had turned out to be. Still, they couldn't afford to lose him. He immediately decided to request assistance from the other priests. Then he issued new orders. The search teams were to head toward the lower central levels of the labyrinth. They would begin their search for the subject there. Meanwhile, Yuma remained beneath the tree. He tried to move. Nothing happened. His body felt incredibly heavy. Something was wrong. But he couldn't understand why. As he lay there, he suddenly heard approaching footsteps. Two voices followed shortly afterward. One of the men sounded surprised. He had heard rumors about the labyrinth before, but he never imagined he would end up this deep inside it. His senior responded immediately. That was because this section was restricted. Only priests and those of higher rank were permitted access. The younger man glanced upward. Then he hesitated. Did that mean that further above was? Before he could finish, the senior snapped at him. His voice carried clear irritation. He warned the younger man to watch his tongue. Some things were better left unsaid. Then they noticed something attached to the wall. The senior man explained that it was a trap designed to kill intruders. Fortunately, the artifact he carried prevented the trap from activating. However, anyone who entered without such an artifact would meet only one fate. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinth, Yuma continued walking through the endless corridors. Suddenly, a hidden trap activated. In an instant, a blade sliced through his neck. His head separated from his body and rolled across the ground. However, a few moments later, something impossible happened. His severed head began to regenerate. Flesh and bone restored themselves as if nothing had happened. Before long, he was completely healed. Once again, he was alive. Yuma slowly stood back up and resumed walking. To him, this had to be some kind of cruel joke. After everything that had happened, he could only see himself as a monster. Then he looked up toward the sky. Tears filled his eyes as he cried. He could not understand why this was happening to him. Eventually, frustration overwhelmed him. He cursed at his situation and swore that he would find a way out of this place. Then, without hesitation, he broke into a run. Not long afterward, the three men spotted Yuma. One of them immediately attempted to chase after him. The senior man quickly shouted at the reckless fool, ordering him to stay in position and stop moving forward. But it was already too late. Suddenly, a gigantic witch-like hand appeared high above the man. It descended without warning. The enormous hand grabbed him and crushed him instantly. Blood and flesh exploded as his life ended on the spot. The remaining two men froze in shock as they witnessed the horrifying scene unfold before their eyes. The other man stared at the spot where his companion had just died. Curious and confused, he asked what exactly had happened. The senior man calmly explained that the fool had chosen to recklessly rush deeper into the labyrinth. As a result, he had triggered an instant death spell. It was a powerful form of magic placed there by a magi specifically to eliminate monsters. Furthermore, he added that even the artifact he carried would no longer protect them beyond this point. Hearing that, the man became curious. He wondered what exactly a magi was. For the moment, the senior man decided that they would remain where they were and wait for the priests to arrive. At the same time, a question continued to bother him. Why had Yuma not been affected by the instant death magic? Elsewhere in the labyrinth, Yuma carefully observed his surroundings. Something about the place felt strange. The farther he traveled, the more inconsistent everything seemed to become. Eventually, he stopped to rest for a moment. As he sat there quietly, a thought crossed his mind. For some reason, the place reminded him of something he had once seen on television. Then, all of a sudden, an unfamiliar voice spoke to him. It asked what he was doing. The sudden voice startled Yuma. He quickly looked around and demanded to know who had spoken. In response, the mysterious voice simply told him to look down. Beside him was a hole. Confused, Yuma cautiously peered into it. The moment he looked down, he found himself face to face with a person inside. The woman greeted him with a smile. She introduced herself as Eva. Then, after giving her name, she politely asked Yuma for his. Yuma quickly realized that the person inside the hole was a girl. He introduced himself and told her his name. As they talked, he noticed several pipe-like tubes connected to her body. Curious, he asked whether she was also being subjected to human experiments. Eva replied that it was something like that. Then she asked if Yuma was being forced to undergo experiments as well. Yuma confirmed it. Hearing that, Eva said that it was unfortunate. She then invited him to relax for a while. After all, it was not often that people came down to where she was. A moment later, Eva noticed that Yuma was completely alone. Curious, she asked how he had managed to get down there by himself. At that moment, memories of everything he had gone through resurfaced in Yuma's mind. After thinking for a moment, he answered that one could say he got there by force. Eva tilted her head and asked what he meant by that. Yuma explained that if he had not possessed the blessing of immortality, he probably would have died several times over by now. Eva found that surprising. She wondered if he truly was immortal. Looking at him, he seemed no different from an ordinary human. In fact, someone like him was incredibly rare. Then it suddenly occurred to her. That was probably the reason he had become a test subject in the first place. Meanwhile, Yuma observed Eva more carefully. Despite her situation, she appeared relatively healthy. Since it seemed they were both victims of similar circumstances, he politely addressed her as Mississippi. However, Eva immediately told him that simply calling her Eva was fine. Yuma quickly apologized and corrected himself. Then, after gathering his courage, he asked whether she would like to run away with him. Yuma admitted that he had practically no fighting ability whatsoever. However, if he made proper use of his blessing of immortality, he believed he could somehow deal with the traps throughout the labyrinth. More importantly, he could not bring himself to abandon a girl who had been left alone in a place like this. So Yuma told her that they should escape together. They could finally breathe fresh air again. They could eat delicious food until their stomachs were completely full. After saying that, Yuma fell silent. He waited nervously for her response. Ironically, Yuma himself had not even stepped foot outside since arriving in this world. Then Eva brought up something he had mentioned earlier. She asked about his plan to deal with the traps. Yuma nodded and explained that he intended to use his immortality. If he went first, he could trigger the traps himself and survive. However, Eva shook her head. She told him that there was no need to become accustomed to pain and fear. At least, not if he wished to remain human. Then she smiled. Yuma attempted to explain himself further, but Eva suddenly asked whether he could see all the small protrusions connected to her body. Yuma answered that he could. Eva then explained what they really were. Those devices existed to drain her blood. Constantly. 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. Yuma was shocked by the revelation. Eva calmly continued, explaining that this was why she was always anemic. She barely had enough energy to move. It was a constant struggle. Then she made a request. She asked whether Yuma would be willing to share a little of his blood with her. In return, she promised that she would help him escape. Eva added that although she might not look particularly impressive in her current state, she was actually quite strong. As Yuma listened, he realized something. The people conducting experiments on him were doing the exact same thing to Eva. Without hesitation, he agreed. If blood was what Eva needed, then she could take as much as she wanted. After all, he would never die. As he said those words, Yuma extended his hand toward her. At the same time, Eva reached out and took it. Then she smiled and told him that it was a promise. However, the moment her hand touched his, a bat suddenly emerged from her hand and flew into the air. Yuma was startled by the unexpected sight. Seeing his reaction, Eva quickly reassured him. There was no need to worry. That bat was simply a part of her. Suddenly, one of the bats brushed against Yuma's skin. A small wound appeared where it touched him. Then, several more bats emerged from Eva's hand and began fluttering around them. At the same time, Eva revealed something attached to the back of her neck. It looked like a seal connected to the various pipes running through her body. Looking at it, she casually remarked that she could finally get rid of it. Without hesitation, she tore it off. For Eva, it was hardly a problem. In fact, she believed she had already burned through the blood she had just received from Yuma. Then she slowly rose from below. Floating before him, she proudly declared that, as promised, in the name of Eva Scarlet, a pure-blood vampire and true ancestor of Red, she swore that she would set Yuma free. The next moment, Eva leaned closer. Then she sank her fangs into Yuma's neck and began drinking his blood. That was when Yuma finally understood. Eva was a vampire. As she drank, Eva's eyes widened with surprise. She was genuinely impressed by the quality of his blood. Not long afterward, she pulled away. Strength rapidly returned to her body. She wondered how long it had been since she had last fed directly from someone. It had been so long that she had nearly forgotten what it felt like. Now, however, her body felt incredibly light. Then, without warning, she kissed him. Afterward, she smiled mischievously. Since this was such a special occasion, she suggested that they make their escape with a little style. Before Yuma could react, Eva effortlessly picked him up. Holding him in her arms, she commented that she had found something rather interesting. Then, from her back, enormous black wings unfolded. With a powerful flap, she launched herself forward. The two of them shot through the labyrinth at tremendous speed. As they flew, Eva reflected on the presence she had sensed from her room. If they intended to escape, then the magi responsible for this place would have to be dealt with first. That was their first obstacle. However, as they continued deeper into the labyrinth, Eva noticed something strange. No matter how far they advanced, the magi had yet to respond. She found that suspicious. Then suddenly, they came to a stop. A voice called out to them. Standing ahead was a group of armed men. One of them immediately recognized what had happened. He asked Eva whether she had managed to break free by using Yuma's immortal blood. Then he ordered his subordinates to prepare for battle. Eva looked at them and scoffed. To her, this wasn't even enough to serve as a warm-up. The men quickly raised their shields and unleashed a barrage of magic. Fire spells shot toward Eva from every direction. However, none of them even came close to hitting her. An invisible barrier surrounded her body, effortlessly blocking every attack. Watching the scene unfold, the senior man was left speechless. Mid-level magic wasn't slowing her down in the slightest. Eva merely smiled. Then she remarked that if they wanted to take a shot at her, they would need something far stronger than that. Immediately afterward, a massive magic circle formed high above her. Its enormous pattern illuminated the entire area. Then Eva unleashed a gigantic fireball upward. Moments later, a tremendous explosion shook the labyrinth. The blast was so powerful that it carved out an enormous crater. Without hesitation, Eva flew straight toward the destruction she had created. For a moment, she admitted that she had considered turning the entire place into a sea of flames. Meanwhile, far below, the three summoned children witnessed everything. As Katomi stared at the sky, she wondered why a monster had suddenly appeared outside. Then she noticed the person being carried in the monster's arms. Could that be Yuma? Before anyone could think it through, Keita acted first. Gripping his spear tightly, he leaped high into the air. As he charged toward them, he shouted at Eva to release Yuma immediately. In response, Eva simply blinked out of sight. An instant later, she appeared directly behind Keita. Then she calmly began preparing a spell. Sensing the danger, Yuma quickly tried to stop her. Then, instead of striking Keita directly, Eva unleashed her spell right in front of him. The blast detonated instantly. A powerful shockwave slammed into Keita and sent him hurtling through the air. Moments later, another explosion erupted where he landed. Far below, Kotomi and Takuya could do nothing but watch. They cried out his name in panic as the smoke and debris swallowed the area. Eva glanced at Yuma. She admitted that his sudden attempt to stop her had given her quite a scare. Yuma quickly explained that he, Keita, and the others had all been summoned to this world at the same time. Hearing that, Eva simply shrugged. What's done was done. Besides, she believed the attack should keep them occupied for a while. Either way, they had finally escaped the labyrinth. The open sky stretched endlessly above them. Fresh air filled their lungs for the first time in what felt like forever. As they continued flying, Eva asked Yuma what he planned to do next. Yuma thought about it for a moment. Then he answered honestly. More than anything, he wanted to find a way back to his original world. Upon hearing that, Eva immediately declared that she would serve as his bodyguard. Yuma gave an awkward smile. That was both reassuring and a little unsettling at the same time. Eva pointed out that she had already vowed to set him free. To vampires, promises carried tremendous importance. They were not things to be taken lightly. Then, with a mischievous smile, she added that she expected Yuma to entertain her thoroughly from now on. And so, carrying Yuma in her arms, Eva continued flying farther and farther away from the facility. Unbeknownst to them, a woman named Edna silently watched the entire scene from a distance. She observed their departure without saying a single word. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a mysterious figure stood before the head priestess. The head priestess informed him that she had a mission for him. His task was simple. He was to recapture the Immortal and retrieve him from the vampire. Then she gave him permission to use that particular tool if necessary. The mysterious figure accepted the order without objection. Sometime later, far from the labyrinth, Yuma and Eva stopped to rest beside a river. The peaceful sound of flowing water filled the air. Eventually, Yuma slowly opened his eyes. Still half asleep, he looked around and wondered where exactly they were. At that moment, Eva casually asked whether he wanted to take a bath. The question itself wasn't shocking. What shocked him was what he saw next. Eva was completely naked. Yuma immediately froze. For him, waking up to such a sight was far too much to process. His face quickly turned red as he struggled to avert his gaze. Then another thought suddenly entered his mind. According to the stories he knew, vampires were supposed to be weak against sunlight. Yet Eva seemed completely unaffected. Before he could ask about it, a man emerged from the foliage and calmly approached. Without saying much, the stranger handed Yuma a set of clothes. Completely caught off guard by the appearance of an unknown person, Yuma stared at him in confusion. Then he immediately asked the obvious question. Just who was this guy? Eva explained that the man was merely an acquaintance. He was nothing more than a traveling salesman she had encountered along the way. Using her abilities, she had placed him under her control and turned him into a slave. Then she explained that mind control was one of a vampire's greatest strengths. However, she assured Yuma that he had nothing to fear. As his bodyguard, she would never even consider making him her slave. After that, she mentioned that a large town was located nearby and suggested that they head there next. But before setting out, they would have a meal. Yuma eagerly accepted and was delighted by the food. As they ate, he became concerned about Eva and asked what she planned to eat. In response, Eva casually told him that she had already satisfied her hunger while he was sleeping. Meanwhile, Yuma admitted that he could not think of any reliable way to earn money quickly. He also made it clear that he did not want to depend on mind control to get by. Eva immediately replied that there were much better options. She explained that if they hunted monsters and sold their materials to the guild, they could earn a considerable amount of money in a short time. However, before they could do that, Yuma would need to register as an adventurer. Hearing that made Yuma realize once again that he truly was living in a fantasy world. As they continued traveling, Yuma noticed something unusual. The surroundings were strangely quiet. The area felt almost completely deserted. Eva agreed with his observation. Then, without another word, she suddenly took off into the air. Moments later, countless monsters of various shapes and sizes came charging toward Yuma. Yet before any of them could reach him, Eva appeared behind the horde and effortlessly cut them down one after another. At that moment, Yuma finally understood why the area had been so silent. The monsters had not disappeared at all. They had simply been fleeing from Eva. Looking at the growing pile of defeated creatures, He wondered how they were supposed to transport all of them. Eva immediately suggested using his item box. Hearing that only left Yuma confused. Eva then informed him that every summoned individual possessed access to an item box if they called for it. Yuma was genuinely surprised, as it was the first time he had ever heard such a thing. She continued by telling him that he should also have an appraisal skill. If he identified and categorized the monsters now, it would save them time and effort later. Curious, Yuma called upon the item box and gave it a try. The moment it appeared, he was stunned. It was exactly like the legendary item box he had only heard about in stories. More importantly, it actually worked. As he experimented with it, he discovered that he could manipulate and organize various things within it with remarkable ease. Then, once again, Eva seemed to notice something. Without hesitation, she flew off into the distance. Shortly afterward, a massive worm-like monster suddenly stirred nearby. Yuma was shocked to see that it was still alive. The creature immediately spat a black substance directly toward him. However, before it could make contact, a magic circle appeared on its own and blocked the attack completely. Yuma stared in surprise. He wondered if that had been magic, especially since he had done absolutely nothing himself. Looking down at his hand, he recalled the strange event from before and realized it felt exactly the same. A short while later, Eva returned and informed him that the sun was about to set. She explained that a friend of hers owned a place nearby and suggested that they spend the night there. Yuma agreed, and the two of them headed in that direction. Later, Yuma found himself growing increasingly uneasy as they stood before what looked like a haunted mansion. In contrast, Eva remarked that the place seemed as popular as ever. Before long, an elderly man greeted them at the entrance and commented that it had certainly been a long time. Eva smiled and told the old butler that he was looking as lively as ever. She then asked whether a room was available for the night. The old butler replied that there certainly was and politely led them inside. As they entered the mansion, Yuma quickly discovered that the place was filled with frightening monsters. Strange creatures wandered the halls, making the atmosphere even more unsettling. Eventually, the butler guided them to a room and politely told them to make themselves at home. Once inside, Yuma looked around and found the room surprisingly decent. It was nothing like what he had expected from a haunted mansion. Still, he had no complaints. In fact, it suited him just fine. After taking a look around, Yuma noticed that there appeared to be only one bed. Hearing that, Eva casually pointed out that the coffin in the room belonged to her. Then, with a teasing smile, she asked whether he would prefer that they sleep together instead. Yuma immediately refused. Of course, it made perfect sense for a vampire to sleep in a coffin. Realizing what Eva had meant, Yuma felt somewhat embarrassed that she had misunderstood him. Soon afterward, he prepared to get some rest. However, just as he was settling into bed, something suddenly crawled out from beneath his blanket. The moment he looked at it, he let out a terrified scream that echoed throughout the entire mansion. The following morning, Eva cheerfully informed him that the cute little ghost seemed to have grown quite fond of him. Yuma, however, was far from amused. He complained that he had not gotten a single wink of sleep all night. To make matters worse, the ghost continued following him wherever he went. It even looked as though it intended to accompany him outside the mansion as well. Yuma pointed out that there was no way he could register as an adventurer while carrying a ghost around on his shoulder. The situation would attract far too much attention. At that point, the butler suggested that he use a spirit stone. Eva then explained that spirit stones were normally used to house spirits, although they should work on ghosts as well. If the ghost stayed inside the stone, Yuma would be able to move around freely without attracting unwanted attention. She added that he could simply think of it as having a guardian spirit watching over him. After considering it for a moment, Yuma decided that it did not seem particularly dangerous. Since the ghost had not caused any real harm so far, he figured it would probably be fine. Later, the two of them arrived at the Adventurers Guild. Approaching the reception desk, Yuma stated that he wanted to register as an adventurer. The receptionist welcomed him and informed him that they would first need to appraise his abilities. While wearing the spirit stone, Yuma found it surprisingly impressive that the ghost was no longer drawing any attention. Unfortunately, that did not mean he was avoiding attention altogether. In fact, he and Eva were currently receiving plenty of stares from the people around them. A short time later, the appraisal was completed. The receptionist informed Yuma that whenever he bought or sold monster materials, he would need to present his adventurer card. Hearing that, Yuma felt relieved. Now that he was officially registered, earning money finally seemed possible. The receptionist then added that the adventurer card could also function as a form of personal identification. Because of that, he was advised to keep it somewhere safe at all times. Suddenly, a man approached their table and called out to Eva. Greeting her with a shameless smile, he suggested that she abandon the weakling beside her and come enjoy a party with him and his friends instead. Yuma immediately became nervous. As he watched Eva being hit on, he wondered what exactly he was supposed to do. Fortunately, Eva showed no interest whatsoever. She flatly rejected the man, pushed him aside, and declared that she was the devoted type. After the interruption, Eva quickly returned to her cheerful mood. Excitedly, she announced that they should head straight for the dungeons. Meanwhile, Yuma still looked exhausted from his sleepless night. Even so, he agreed. Before they left, however, he decided that he wanted to use his appraisal skill to check Eva's stats. Soon afterward, they entered the dungeon. It did not take long before they encountered all kinds of monsters. Yet, as always, Eva remained completely unfazed. Neither their appearance nor their aggression seemed to bother her in the slightest. Some time later, Eva stood triumphantly atop a pile of defeated monsters. Looking unusually pleased, she remarked that it was amazing. According to her, it was the first time monsters had actually tried attacking her first instead of running away. Curious, Yuma examined Eva's status using his appraisal skill. While looking through her information, he noticed something unexpected. Among her various settings was a toggle that appeared to control monster aggro. Interested in what would happen, Yuma reached out and switched it off. Eva could hardly believe that summoned individuals were capable of doing something like that. Intrigued, she immediately wanted to take a closer look at the feature herself. However, Yuma quickly reminded her to be careful. If she wanted to avoid attracting attention, she needed to make sure nobody discovered what she really was. That meant no wings. Meanwhile, he would stay behind and collect all of the monster drops. Not long after, the cute ghost suddenly emerged from the spirit stone. Seeing it appear, Yuma jokingly asked whether it planned to help him. To his surprise, the little ghost immediately floated off and began gathering the drops alongside him. As the pile of loot continued to grow, Yuma could not help but feel optimistic. With this amount of money, financial problems should no longer be an issue for the foreseeable future. Everything that had happened so far still felt like a dream. Even now, he had not fully grasped the reality of his situation. However, there was one thing he knew for certain. At the very least, he was no longer alone. Then, without warning, someone suddenly grabbed him from behind. Before he could react, he was forced to the ground. A gag was shoved into his mouth, preventing him from calling for help. Within moments, he was completely restrained. Meanwhile, Eva returned after exploring the area. Looking around, she immediately noticed that Yuma was nowhere to be seen. Confused, she wondered where he had gone. Then she sensed something. A presence appeared behind her. The moment she turned around, a massive man lunged forward and unleashed a devastating punch. The impact shattered the ground beneath him. Fortunately, Eva reacted in time. She dodged the attack and leaped into the air. As she landed gracefully a short distance away, her expression turned cold. She declared that she would only ask once. Then she demanded to know where Yuma was. The enemy simply laughed. As expected of a pure-blood vampire, he remarked, her defenses were truly impressive. Then he proposed another approach. At his signal, his companion launched an attack. The second enemy dashed forward at incredible speed and unleashed a relentless barrage of strikes. As Eva observed his movements, she quickly identified him as a ghoul. Yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. Looking closer, she noticed markings covering the creature's arms. That was when she realized the truth. The ghoul was undead, yet it had been enhanced with holy magic. A moment later, one of the attacks landed directly on her. At the same time, powerful restraints activated around her body. Eva's eyes widened in shock. What in the world was happening? Then the answer came to her. These people were part of a church search team. One of the men grinned as he looked down at her. Seeing a pure-blood vampire in such a miserable state was exactly what he expected from the central church. Watching such a beautiful face twist in frustration, he added, was incredibly stimulating. Far away from the battle, Yuma remained bound and helpless. However, as he struggled against the restraints, he noticed something strange. A magic circle suddenly appeared around his arms. The next instant, the bindings vanished completely. Yuma stared in shock. The ropes had simply disappeared. Immediately, he remembered the mysterious incidents from before. Was this the same phenomenon? There was no time to think about it. Everything was riding on this. It was all or nothing. Without hesitation, Yuma formed a defensive spell and ordered it to reach Eva. Back at the battlefield, Eva remained on one knee. Then she noticed something unexpected. The restraints binding her had suddenly been dispelled. At that exact moment, the giant man charged forward again and swung another devastating punch. However, just before the attack could connect, Yuma arrived. At the same time, the defensive magic reached Eva and expanded into a barrier. The giant's fist slammed directly into it. The barrier held. The attack was completely blocked. Yuma immediately rushed to Eva's side and asked if she was all right. Eva confirmed that she was. However, the situation was far from over. She explained that her magical power was currently unstable. Because of that, she was unable to use magic at all. Yuma repeated her words. Her magic. If that was the problem, then perhaps there was a solution. A sudden idea formed in his mind. Eva suddenly realized something. She quickly asked if what had happened earlier was Yuma's magic. Yuma confirmed it. He explained that it was some kind of instant teleportation. Then he added that he could also use a barrier-like ability. However, he sounded nervous while talking about it. Eva noticed immediately and told him to relax and take it easy. Meanwhile, the bald man wondered how Yuma had managed to get there. However, he quickly dismissed the question. In his eyes, it didn't matter since he believed he couldn't die anyway. Then he ordered his men to tear the two of them apart. As another wave of attacks came rushing toward them, Eva immediately prepared herself. She scooped Yuma into her arms and effortlessly dodged the incoming strikes while taking to the air. However, one of the enemy mages raised a staff-like artifact and activated a spell. Moments later, a massive magic circle spread across the ground beneath them. Eva instantly recognized the spell. It was a magical barrier that was completely impervious to physical attacks. Their enemies had clearly come prepared. They had set it up specifically to stop her from escaping. Then, while the barrier remained active, the bald man tossed an item toward the ghoul and ordered him to use it. The object looked like some kind of potion. The ghoul immediately bit into it and chewed it down. Right after that, he unleashed a blazing fire blast toward Eva and Yuma. Eva immediately noticed something unusual. The attack contained an even greater amount of high-level holy magic. Fortunately, Yuma reacted at once and blocked the blast. Yuma was shocked that he had actually managed to do it. It felt as though he was finally starting to get the hang of his abilities. Then he told Eva that he thought he could use another teleportation-type spell. If he could make full use of it, he believed he might be able to fight back. However, he admitted that he still wasn't fully accustomed to teleporting and needed time to concentrate. Hearing that, Eva smiled and remarked that he was truly interesting. Eva then explained that the magic Yuma was using belonged to an ancient system. Unlike modern-era magic, which required understanding and precise knowledge to activate, ancient magic functioned differently. It relied on intuition and emotion. Judging from the absence of symbols within his magic circles, there was no doubt about it. Then she told him to focus and visualize his will. At that moment, the ghoul suddenly leaped directly in front of them. He was just about to unleash another spell. However, before he could act, Yuma activated a teleportation magic circle. Instantly, the ghoul's arm was transferred behind his own body, causing him to accidentally strike himself instead. Yuma's eyes widened as he realized he had successfully pulled it off. Eva was equally impressed by what she had just witnessed. Meanwhile, the ghoul collapsed onto the ground. Yet only a few moments later, he stood back up again as if absolutely nothing had happened. Yuma immediately noticed that the attack hadn't really affected their enemy. Eva, meanwhile, was stunned by a horrifying realization. The ghoul was an undead creature capable of using holy magic while also being resistant to it. Then the bald man handed him another potion, and the ghoul quickly drank it down. The bald man admitted that, to be honest, he had been shocked as well when the church first handed that thing over to him. Then he assumed that Yuma knew nothing about how magic truly worked in this world. So he began explaining it himself. Originally, magic was a power possessed only by magical beings. The magic used by humans was merely borrowed power, granted by spirits and divine beasts. It was nothing more than that. Therefore, even when humans cast spells of the same level, their magic could never compare to that of genuine magical beings. The difference between the two was simply overwhelming. The bald man explained that this was exactly why the church had created the ghoul boy. He was a monster raised to be loyal to humans. A living weapon capable of wielding holy magic against his fellow monsters. Then the bald man asked how Yuma thought the church had managed to create such an extraordinary ghoul in the first place. He began explaining the process. From birth, children were raised for the sole purpose of becoming ghouls. Hearing that much alone left Yuma completely stunned. He immediately asked how the bald man could sound so proud while talking about sacrificing children. However, the bald man rejected the accusation. He clarified that those children were merely orphans. According to him, they had simply made use of lives that had already been abandoned. Lives that were supposedly worthless and thrown away. At that moment, Yuma realized something. The bald man might have looked human on the outside, but in reality, he was a monster. Eva then spoke up. She explained that alchemy which distorted reason was considered taboo. She already knew that the church was willing to steal magical power in order to create chimeras. However, even by those standards, this had gone far beyond acceptable limits. The bald man simply replied that her way of thinking was outdated. In his eyes, it was nothing more than an archaic mindset. Meanwhile, Yuma asked Eva if he could speak with her for a moment. However, the bald man interrupted them. He declared that they had talked long enough and that it was time to get back to business. Without another word, the ghoul prepared another attack. A powerful fire blast surged toward Yuma and Eva once again. However, just before it could hit them, both of them vanished from sight. An instant later, they reappeared directly behind the ghoul. Eva immediately activated her mind control ability. Then she warned Yuma that the effect would only last for a brief moment, so he needed to act quickly. Yuma wasted no time. He grabbed the ghoul's head and activated a force block spell. Instantly, the ghoul lost consciousness. Watching from afar, the bald man was completely confused. He couldn't understand what Yuma had just done. Then Yuma declared that he was taking the child with him. As for payment, he told them they could have something in return. At that moment, he activated a teleportation circle beneath the ground. The bald man's eyes widened in shock. He immediately realized what had happened. The attack being teleported was the ghoul's own fire blast. Before he could react, it detonated directly beneath them. The explosion consumed them instantly. And just like that, they died. Afterward, Yuma and Eva walked away while carrying the unconscious boy with them. As they traveled, Eva remarked that their very first day in the dungeon had certainly not gone as expected. Still, she admitted that they had managed to obtain some rather unexpected loot. Eva also confessed that she had been surprised when Yuma suddenly decided to take the ghoul with them. However, the idea sounded interesting enough that she decided to go along with it. Curious, she asked Yuma what he intended to do with the boy. However, before he could answer, she noticed that he had already collapsed behind her. Sometime later, Yuma found himself resting in a room with the ghost quietly beside him. As he slowly opened his eyes, he wondered where he was. Eva immediately greeted him and asked how he was feeling. Yuma replied that he wasn't feeling too bad. Then he asked if they were back at the inn they had visited earlier. His memories were still somewhat hazy. In response, Eva gently placed a wet towel on top of his head. Yuma caught the scent coming from the towel and immediately asked what it was. The smell was surprisingly pleasant. Eva explained that the owner of the house had prepared it for him. Then she reminded him of what had happened after the incident in the dungeon. Right after everything was over, he had become so exhausted that he fainted on the spot. Even for someone who was immortal, he still had his limits. Eva explained that physical exhaustion could be easily cured with magic. However, mental fatigue was a completely different matter. Then, without warning, she started taking off Yuma's clothes and casually declared that a massage was the best remedy. Yuma immediately panicked. He quickly insisted that he was perfectly fine. However, Eva told him there was no need to be so tense about it. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, she mentioned that she planned to head into town for a little shopping. The moment she mentioned going into town, Yuma remembered what had happened in the dungeon. He warned her that it might still be dangerous outside. However, Eva reassured him that the town had extremely strict rules regarding violence and conflicts within its walls. As long as they remained inside the town, there shouldn't be any problems. With that settled, Eva turned toward the cute ghost and asked it to watch over Yuma while she was away. As she left, Yuma suddenly remembered the boy they had rescued the previous day. In the heat of the moment, they had ended up bringing him back with them. Left alone with his thoughts, Yuma reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that he himself was the target. As long as people stayed by his side, they would inevitably be dragged into danger. The thought made him wonder whether it was really okay for things to continue this way. Noticing his troubled expression, one of the servants approached him and asked if something was bothering him. Yuma admitted that he was genuinely worried. From this point onward, the church would likely continue hunting him. That was exactly why he felt so grateful to have Eva with him. However, if she ended up getting captured again because of him, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself. The servant listened quietly before smiling. There was no need to worry, he said. Eva possessed far more strength than most people could possibly imagine. More importantly, she had an incredibly cheerful spirit that rarely wavered. Meanwhile, back in town, Eva wandered through the streets at her usual leisurely pace. As she passed a fruit stand, a merchant called out to her, advertising fresh fruit and even offering a discount. Eva briefly considered the offer and took a look at the merchant's selection. After making a purchase, however, something else caught her attention nearby. She overheard a group of adventurers discussing a situation in the forest. One adventurer reported that a massive pack of dire wolves had appeared. There were at least several hundred of them. Another immediately suggested gathering every available adventurer from the guild. One man added that, according to a witness, the entire pack was being led by an exceptionally large direwolf. Hearing that, another adventurer looked confused. As far as he knew, every direwolf was already enormous to begin with. While they were talking, one of the adventurers noticed Eva heading toward the direction of the forest. Alarmed, he quickly called out to her and warned her not to go there. The area was far too dangerous. Eva simply thanked him for his concern. Then, in the very next moment, she launched herself into the air. A powerful gust of wind swept past the adventurers as she shot toward the forest at incredible speed. The men could only stare in stunned silence as she disappeared into the distance. After a moment, one adventurer told his friend to calm down. Right now, they still weren't fully prepared to head into the forest themselves. However, the other man shook his head. They didn't have much time. They would need to move out soon. With that, he ordered his companion to gear up immediately. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, the dire wolves surrounded a terrified couple. Low growls echoed through the trees as the beasts slowly closed in on their prey. Then one of the dire wolves suddenly lunged forward. The man managed to block the attack with his sword, but the creature's overwhelming strength sent the weapon flying from his hands. As the direwolf's jaws snapped toward him, he realized there was nothing left he could do. Then, in the next instant, the sword came hurtling back. The blade pierced straight through the attacking direwolf and sent it crashing away. Seizing the opportunity, the man immediately grabbed his companion and told her they needed to run. Without hesitation, the two escaped as fast as they could. Watching them flee, the leading direwolf narrowed its eyes. Then it caught a familiar scent. The beast growled in recognition. It was that little bat who had come to interfere again. The dire wolf let out a snarl and declared that after 400 years spent ruling this forest, it had become the true master of these lands. From here, it intended to destroy the nearby human settlements and use their destruction to further increase its power. The moment those words left its mouth, two dire wolves charged directly at Eva. Eva didn't move. She simply stood there, completely unfazed. Then, with a single motion, she swung her hand. The heads of both dire wolves were severed instantly. As their bodies collapsed to the ground, Eva looked at the leader and mockingly repeated his words. "Oh my, a mere few hundred years, you say?" She calmly remarked that someone as young as him shouldn't be so reckless. Then her body began to change. As she slowly shapeshifted, Eva explained that she had grown quite fond of the town nearby. More importantly, her companion was currently resting there. Then she asked the direwolf leader what business it had mentioned again. The atmosphere immediately changed. The master direwolf's arrogance vanished. Its fierce aura disappeared entirely, replaced by fear and submission. Meanwhile, Eva completed her transformation into a massive wolf form. Back in town, Eva casually spoke with one of the adventurers and commented that things seemed quite lively around there. The adventurer immediately recognized her. He told her that he had genuinely been worried. After all, the forest was extremely dangerous at the moment. Then he asked if she had just returned from there. Eva simply smiled and replied that it seemed the wolves had merely been passing through. Shortly afterward, she went on her way. As the adventurer watched her leave, he noticed something resting on his chest. A star-shaped flower petal. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Yuma gently patted the sleeping boy's head. As he looked at the child, he wondered whether he would remain like this forever. The servant considered the question for a moment. Without a master to command him, he supposed the boy might remain asleep indefinitely. Furthermore, if he continued to go without food during that time, his body could slowly continue to decompose. The servant then offered Yuma a piece of advice. Emotions were strange things. Sometimes, before a person even realized it, they could become overwhelmingly heavy. That was why, every now and then, being selfish was equally important. After saying that, the servant excused himself. He believed it was about time for him to take his leave. However, he reminded Yuma not to hesitate to call for him if he needed anything. Once the servant was gone, Yuma leaned back against the bed and quietly reflected on everything that had happened. Some time later, the servant returned to inform him that supper was ready. However, as he entered the room, something on the floor caught his attention. A white feather flower. It was a flower commonly known for easing fatigue and relieving depression. Then the servant remembered its meaning in florography. "I pray for your happiness." And for a brief moment, the room fell completely silent. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, three adventurers found themselves surrounded by several undead creatures blocking their path. Their leader clicked his tongue in annoyance and cursed under his breath. He declared that they were nothing more than undead and shouldn't get carried away. Then, without hesitation, he swung his weapon and cut down several of them. However, one of the adventurers pointed out that the enemies just kept coming no matter how many they defeated. Meanwhile, the female adventurer reminded their leader that this was supposed to be nothing more than a simple scouting mission. They paused briefly and steadied themselves. But the moment they turned around, their expressions froze. Even more undead had appeared behind them, and leading the entire horde was a lich. Meanwhile, back at the inn, a crow arrived carrying a message. A servant quickly retrieved the letter and began reading its contents. Inside one of the rooms, Yuma was suddenly called over to look at something. It was Eva. While the child had been unconscious, she had apparently changed the kid's clothes. The sight immediately shocked Yuma. His panic only grew worse when he noticed that the child's arm had been removed. Eva calmly attempted to attach another arm in its place. Yuma frantically asked what they were supposed to do since the limb wasn't regenerating the way his own body could. Eva explained that the cells in the severed arm were already dead. Because of that, it could no longer regenerate, even with the use of magic. That was why she had decided to try attaching a new arm instead. Just then, a knock echoed through the room. The servant politely excused himself and asked whether it was a good time to enter. Eva immediately became irritated. She snapped back, asking if he couldn't see that they were busy at the moment. At the same time, they continued wrapping the child in bandages. Later, Davis prepared tea for everyone. Eva complimented him, saying that his tea was as splendid as ever. After taking a moment to enjoy it, her expression shifted. She asked Davis what the matter was. Davis informed them that they had just received a report. A group of undead was currently rampaging through the eastern mountains. More importantly, it had been confirmed that at the center of the outbreak was an incredibly powerful lich. The word lich immediately lingered in Yuma's mind. If he remembered correctly, a lich was often referred to as the king of the undead. Eva nodded with satisfaction. As expected of Davis, he always seemed to know exactly what information she wanted. She then asked him just how powerful this lich was. Davis explained that, judging from the overwhelming miasma spreading throughout the forest and the sheer number of undead under its command, there was no doubt that it was a high-class lich. Eva responded that, in that case, they could simply overwrite it. Confused, Yuma asked what exactly they were planning to overwrite. Eva explained that they intended to overwrite the ghoul's control authority. Davis elaborated further. At the moment, the ghoul had no master controlling it. However, unless they overwrote the high-grade control authority magic currently influencing it, there would be no way for anyone to become the ghoul's master. Yuma finally understood what they meant. Still, a new concern crossed his mind. He pointed out that if they did that, wouldn't the lich simply become the ghoul's new master instead? Eva answered with a confident smirk. She asked Yuma if he really thought she would allow something like that to happen. She then explained that control authority could be transferred from one owner to another. That was precisely why she intended to make the lich cooperate with them. Through that cooperation, they would take control of the ghoul for themselves. She declared that she would be the one holding control authority over the ghoul. And if the lich refused to cooperate, then she would simply bend it the same way she had casually bent the spoon moments earlier. Later, as they prepared to depart, Davis handed Yuma a letter and instructed him to deliver it to their informant. He also warned him to be careful, explaining that the eastern mountains were filled with venomous insects. The warning alone was enough to make Yuma nervous. However, Eva immediately questioned what Davis was talking about. Then she casually pointed out that they weren't going there on foot in the first place. They would simply fly there. Later, as they soared across the eastern mountains, Yuma noticed that the cute ghost had started drifting ahead of the group. Curious, he wondered where the little spirit was heading. The ghost floated around as if searching for something. Then, after spotting something in the distance, it immediately changed direction and rushed toward it. Eva followed behind. Soon, they arrived at the location and discovered a woman dressed entirely in white. After landing, Yuma politely greeted her. He asked if she was the informant they had come to meet. However, the moment the woman turned around, Yuma nearly jumped out of his skin. Her appearance was so terrifying that he was instantly overwhelmed with fear. Eva, on the other hand, recognized her immediately. She identified the woman as a banshee and handed over the letter. Meanwhile, Yuma collapsed on the spot from sheer shock. As the banshee read the contents of the letter, she simply replied that the information had been confirmed and that she would make her report. She explained that there was currently a nest of undead deep within the forest. Everything that lived would rot. And everything that rotted would live. Because of that phenomenon, humans had already deemed the area too dangerous. There was no point in sending adventurers there anymore. However, the situation wasn't only affecting humans. Even the undead themselves were suffering. The banshee explained that the thicker the miasma became, the more power undead creatures gained. But that increase in strength came at a terrible cost. It brought extreme pain. The lower-grade undead that were running wild throughout the forest were enduring unbearable suffering because of the miasma. And so, despite being undead herself, the banshee pleaded for them to be saved. Eva listened quietly before explaining that, unfortunately, they hadn't come there for her. Their target was the lich. Then she reached down, grabbed Yuma's hand, and helped him back to his feet. However, Eva added that they would still do something about the miasma while they were there. The banshee then informed them that seeing through the miasma from above would be impossible. If they wanted to reach their destination, they would have to continue on foot. As the group moved deeper into the forest, Yuma gradually noticed something was wrong. The farther they traveled, the harder it became to breathe. Every step felt heavier than the last. Eva quickly noticed his condition and pointed out that the miasma was finally starting to affect him. Still, she casually assured him that he wouldn't die from it. Then, without warning, she transformed into a normal-sized wolf. Eva told Yuma to climb onto her back. She explained that traveling that way would be much easier for him. Yuma did as he was told. The moment he settled onto her back, he couldn't help but notice how surprisingly soft her fur was. And with that, their journey continued. Now, they were finally on their way to meet the lich. The journey continued with Yuma riding on Eva's back as they made their way deeper into the forest. However, Eva suddenly came to a stop. She complained that the thick miasma was making her nose feel strange and that she was getting tired of dealing with it. Then she glanced at the little ghost and wondered if it could guide them the rest of the way. Eva pointed out that ghosts were naturally drawn toward the presence of powerful undead. Since the lich was their destination, she figured the little ghost should be able to find it. She asked if she could count on it. The little ghost immediately agreed. And so, before long, the tiny spirit took the lead while the others followed behind. As they traveled, they encountered numerous undead wandering through the forest. Yet none of them paid much attention to the group as they simply passed by. The sight reminded Yuma of something. He asked whether the little ghost would eventually go wild like the other undead affected by the miasma. Eva told him not to worry. She explained that the little ghost was much closer to a sprite than a true undead creature. Because of that, the miasma had little to no effect on it. The group soon leaped down a cliff and continued onward. Then, after several more moments of traveling, they finally found their target. Upon spotting him, they came to a halt. Eva casually apologized for the interruption and politely asked if they could have a word. The lich immediately recognized her. He identified Eva as a high-ranking vampire. However, he had no intention of entertaining her presence. The lich coldly stated that he didn't have time to deal with the likes of her and ordered her to leave at once. Eva merely sighed. She said it was a shame. Then she remarked that if words weren't going to work, perhaps a little force would. Without another warning, she unleashed a blazing fire blast toward the lich. Before the attack could reach him, however, numerous undead rushed forward and formed a protective wall around their master. The explosion tore through them. At the same time, Eva lunged forward and struck the remaining undead with overwhelming force. Watching her fight, the lich finally realized exactly who she was. He identified her as the insatiable pureblood. Once the surrounding undead had been scattered, Eva stepped back and clicked her tongue. She told the lich that she truly hated being called by that name. The lich responded that he had seen her before. And from his perspective, it was an honor to receive a visit from someone like her. Eva smirked. "So, you feel like talking now?" she asked. Unfortunately, the answer was still no. The lich stated that he had no interest in exchanging words with those who had willingly chosen the path of monsters themselves. At that point, Eva's patience finally ran out. She called him an awfully talkative skeleton. Then she issued a command. She ordered her pets to rise. Immediately, countless monstrous servants emerged from her shadow. The creatures crawled out from the darkness beneath her feet as if answering their master's call. Eva looked toward the lich and declared that it was time for dinner. The bloody servants instantly charged forward. The lich remained completely unfazed. In response, large groups of undead burst from the ground and formed another defensive line around him. The undead shield intercepted the monsters and blocked their advance. Eva calmly pointed toward the battlefield. Then she remarked that even bones would eventually turn to ashes if enough power was applied. The next moment, she unleashed another fire blast. A massive explosion engulfed the entire area. The resulting shockwave was so powerful that Yuma was sent flying straight into a nearby bush. Despite the overwhelming attack, Yuma was stunned by what he saw next. The lich was still standing. As the smoke gradually cleared, the lich began casting black magic. He invoked a spell known as Summon Death. Suddenly, an enormous undead dragon materialized beside him. The monstrous creature towered over the battlefield and radiated an overwhelming presence. Yuma stared in disbelief. He couldn't hide his shock at the sight of an actual dragon. Meanwhile, Eva remained completely unbothered. She simply looked up at the undead beast and casually remarked that the lich had acquired quite a nice little piece for himself. The undead dragon began preparing its next attack. Thick black smoke gathered inside its mouth as dark energy condensed into a devastating blast. The moment Yuma saw it, he immediately realized that was definitely not a good sign. Acting on instinct, he quickly deployed a barrier around Eva. A second later, the undead dragon unleashed its attack. The massive blast erupted forward, and smoke engulfed the surrounding forest. When the attack finally subsided, Eva praised Yuma for the support. Yuma appreciated the compliment, but he had his own reasons for helping. He admitted that he didn't want to spend his life constantly relying on others. If there was something he could do, then he wanted to do it himself. Soon afterward, Eva and the undead dragon took their battle into the sky. They soared through the air while the lich continuously launched attacks toward Eva. However, Yuma was supporting her from below. Using ancient magic, he cast teleportation circles in midair and redirected the lich's attacks. Instead of striking Eva, the attacks were shifted toward the undead dragon itself. Watching the spell in action, the lich immediately recognized the magic Yuma was using. He identified it as ancient magic. The lich remarked that the vampire seemed to have acquired a rather annoying little sidekick. Then he decided that perhaps he should deal with Yuma personally. At that moment, the ground nearby began to tremble. A massive crack slowly spread across the earth. As the terrain opened up, something enormous began emerging from below. Eva noticed it immediately. She casually remarked that it had finally decided to join the game. Meanwhile, the Lich turned his attention toward the disturbance. Looking at the rising creature, he calmly noted that it had finally awakened. The brief distraction was all Eva needed. She instantly dashed toward the Lich. As she closed the distance, she mocked him for thinking it was a good idea to turn his back on her. Eva unleashed a rapid series of strikes. Her fists came flying one after another. However, despite the speed of her assault, the Lich managed to evade every single attack. Then, from behind the Lich, the undead dragon launched another blast toward Eva. Fortunately, Yuma's barrier remained active. The attack slammed into the magical shield and failed to break through. Eva smirked and openly mocked the dragon. She declared that its attacks simply weren't strong enough. Then, without warning, the battle suddenly shifted. The undead dragon turned around and flew away. The Lich climbed onto its back, and together they retreated from the battlefield. Eva remained standing there for a moment, completely confused. Then irritation quickly took over. Furious, she demanded to know where they thought they were going. Without hesitation, she immediately took off after them. Unfortunately, Yuma was left behind. He shouted for Eva to wait up before attempting to follow. However, by the time he entered the forest, she was already nowhere to be seen. As he wandered through the trees, he couldn't help wondering where she had gone. Just then, the little ghost floated into his field of vision and started trying to get his attention. Yuma looked at the tiny spirit and asked if it was planning to guide him. The ghost happily floated ahead. Having no better option, Yuma followed. A short while later, they arrived at a massive hole in the ground. The crater was enormous. Yuma sat near the edge and stared at it from a safe distance. A part of him was tempted to look inside. But he quickly decided against it. It was simply too terrifying. Besides, something else was bothering him. He couldn't tell if it was his imagination, but the air around him seemed to be growing colder. The deeper silence made his skin crawl. Before long, goosebumps spread across his body. Suddenly, the little ghost's attention shifted to the side. The spirit stared at something beyond the trees. Curious, Yuma slowly turned his head. The moment he did, his blood ran cold. Towering over them was a gigantic monster. Several massive horns protruded from its body. And at the very top of its head was a horrifying mouth. The colossal creature stood over them like a nightmare brought to life. The monster crawled closer to Yuma. Looking at the grotesque creature, he couldn't help but wonder if it was some kind of giant baby zombie. Then Eva returned and immediately asked where the bag of bones had gone. She noticed Yuma's pale expression and asked what was wrong. Yuma replied that it was because she had left him behind. Eva then turned her attention to the giant monster. Aside from the tangled mass of unique auras emanating from it, she had no doubt that this creature was the source of the miasma spreading throughout the forest. In her eyes, creating this enormous being had likely been the Lich's objective all along. Yuma wondered why anyone would do such a thing. Eva said she could think of several reasons. For example, considering the tremendous influence it had over the nearby undead, the Lich could easily use it to seize control of one or even two towns. Just then, the Lich returned. Eva remarked that speak of the devil. The Lich immediately called them a nuisance. Yuma took the opportunity to question him. He asked why he was doing this and what he hoped to gain from creating such a monster. However, the Lich informed him that he was mistaken. The Lich explained that the creature was not something he had created. In fact, the very reason he had come here was to seal it away. At that moment, a massive magic seal appeared high above them. Thick black smoke descended from it and wrapped itself around the giant baby monster. Finally, Eva realized what was actually happening. The smoke continued to coil around the creature until the giant baby monster completely vanished from sight. Then, several ghostly children emerged from within it. Their souls drifted toward the Lich. One by one, the children gathered around him before slowly entering his wand. To Yuma, the scene felt strangely conflicting. It was somewhat comforting, yet at the same time, it was deeply sad. The mixture of emotions left him with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. The Lich quietly declared that may their souls find eternal rest within him. Then he turned and began walking away. Yuma quickly called out to stop him. He said he had a request. He explained that there was a child who had been turned into a ghoul by the church and that they were currently looking after him. However, the boy no longer had a master. Without one, his body would eventually rot away. Because of that, Yuma asked the Lich to overwrite the ghoul's control authority. In response, the Lich immediately raised his staff and threatened him. He demanded to know whether what Yuma had said was true. The Lich warned him that if he was being deceived, there would be hell to pay. The two stared at each other for a moment. Then Yuma firmly confirmed that everything he had said was true. After hearing his answer, the Lich lowered his guard and simply told him to lead the way. Meanwhile, back in the capital, people continued going about their daily routines as usual. Beneath the great tree, The priest received a report stating that everything was proceeding smoothly. The priest responded by saying that, in that case, they should wait for the signal. Just then, someone approached him and addressed him as Mr. Priest. The man thanked him for the medicine he had provided. According to him, his daughter, along with the rest of the townspeople, had made a full recovery. The priest told the mayor that he was glad to hear the good news. Nearby, a loud voice suddenly shouted for everyone to watch out. At the same time, a monster was swiftly cut down. It was Takuya. After finishing off the creature, he remarked that it had been a close call. Then he warned everyone that the area was still dangerous and instructed them to evacuate to the shelter. Meanwhile, Katomi reported that she had finished purifying the toxins in the area. However, Keita seemed unimpressed. He commented that it was kind of boring. The monsters they had encountered didn't even qualify as a warm-up. The priest smiled and praised the heroes. As expected of them, they had made quick work of all the monsters that had occupied the town. He added that it was truly astounding how much all of them had progressed. Takuya humbly responded that it was nothing special. Meanwhile, Katomi remained silent. Then the priest apologized for bringing up another matter right after they had finished their work. However, he explained that he had important news. They had finally discovered where Mr. Yuma was being held. Upon hearing that, Katomi immediately reacted. Really? The priest confirmed it. Fortunately, according to their information, Yuma appeared to be completely unharmed. Katomi expressed her relief and gratitude upon hearing the news. However, the priest continued. According to their sources, Yuma was still under the control of a terrible vampire. Furthermore, the vampire possessed not only incredible combat abilities but also the power to brainwash others. Because of that, rescuing Yuma could prove to be quite difficult. The priest then stated that they would provide additional reinforcements for the mission. Before he could even finish speaking, Keita interrupted him. He declared that they didn't need any reinforcements. He would handle the vampire himself. Keita added that he intended to make the vampire pay for blasting him before. Then he told the others that they should get moving immediately. Meanwhile, back at the haunted house, the Lich entered the building. The moment he stepped inside, most of the ghosts became visibly terrified. Seeing their reaction, Yuma wondered why the atmosphere had suddenly become so tense. Without paying attention to the others, the Lich slowly approached the ghoul kid. Yuma pointed toward the child and explained that he was the ghoul whose control authority they wanted the Lich to overwrite. The moment the Lich laid eyes on the boy, his demeanor completely changed. He slowly knelt before the child. Then, in a remorseful voice, he said that this was all his fault and asked for forgiveness. At that moment, a memory from long ago resurfaced. In the past, a young boy approached his instructor and informed him that he had brought the requested materials. The instructor simply told him to leave them over there. The Lich explained that he had known this child in his previous life, back when he had still been a servant of the nation. The boy lingered for a moment after delivering the materials. Noticing this, the instructor asked what he wanted. The boy quickly replied that it was nothing. He was simply honored to be of service to such a great individual. The great instructor himself. The instructor immediately told him to stop flattering him. However, the boy insisted that it wasn't flattery. He explained that while others fought tirelessly on the front lines against the Demon Lord's forces, the instructor worked just as hard behind the scenes. Day after day, he dedicated himself to easing the suffering of the nation's people who had been exhausted by the war. The boy's eyes sparkled with admiration. With genuine excitement, he declared that the instructor was the nation's greatest treasure. The instructor immediately told him to stop because it was exhausting to listen to. Then he informed the boy that he would be heading back to the research facility to continue his studies. Outside, someone immediately recognized him as the famous magical arts instructor. The people nearby began talking about him among themselves. They remarked that he was incredibly handsome. Even from a distance, anyone could instantly tell who he was. However, he was equally famous for being extremely unsociable. Countless people applied to become his apprentice, yet he rejected every single one of them without exception. Still, some believed that was part of his charm. They said he had that mysterious lone wolf aura about him. As the conversations continued, the instructor noticed a child sitting alone in front of a flower. Curious, he approached and asked what he was doing. The moment the child looked up, the instructor recognized his clothing. He was one of the orphans recently taken in by the church. The instructor then asked if he was worried about the wilted flower. Without another word, he cast a spell. Almost instantly, the flower regained its vitality. Its petals straightened, and life returned to it as though it had never wilted at all. Now it was all better. The child giggled with joy and thanked him. In response, the instructor gently patted his head. Soon, other nearby children noticed the interaction. Before long, they all ran over to gather around the instructor. A few days later, the instructor noticed something unusual outside. In the distance, he spotted a lantern. Judging by its location, it seemed to be near the unused warehouse. Finding it suspicious, he stepped outside and headed toward the building. Then he looked inside. What greeted him was a horrifying sight. A group of researchers was conducting experiments on a dismembered child. The instructor froze in shock. One of the men noticed him standing there and immediately became startled. He demanded to know why the instructor was there. As the instructor looked more closely, his expression changed completely. The child no longer had any arms. His eyes widened as he took in the gruesome scene before him. At that moment, the priest appeared. He calmly apologized to the instructor. Then he explained that they needed him to continue working with them for a little while longer. The priest added that, after all, it was the instructor's research that had made all of this possible. While speaking, the priest secretly prepared a spell. Then, without warning, he cast it directly at the instructor's back. The instructor cried out in agony. His body collapsed onto the ground. The priest then instructed the others to leave before the instructor regained consciousness. Sometime later, the instructor slowly opened his eyes. As consciousness returned, he muttered to himself. He had worked tirelessly. Everything he had done had been for the peace of the nation. Slowly, he pushed himself back to his feet. Then, filled with both determination and rage, he made a vow. He would never forgive them. Later, the once peaceful facility was suddenly rocked by a massive explosion. Panic spread among the people. Amid the chaos stood the instructor. His voice echoed through the destruction as he declared that everything should turn to ashes. Soon, several magicians surrounded him. They launched attack after attack. Eventually, he was overwhelmed. By the end of the battle, he was covered in blood. The magicians loaded his battered body into a carriage. Later, they arrived at a massive pit. Without hesitation, they threw him inside. One of the men casually remarked that the pit was almost full. The instructor struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. All around him were the severed heads of children. Countless innocent victims surrounded him from every direction. Shaken to his core, he reached out and touched one of the heads. Then he whispered a single question. As darkness slowly consumed his consciousness, he muttered one final word. Never! Then everything faded away. Time passed. Fueled by his immense mana and overwhelming grudge, he eventually transformed into a lich. As for those children, they too had awakened because of the resentment he carried within him. One by one, the lich granted them eternal rest. And now, only this child remained. The lich began the process of overriding the control authority. Not long afterward, the procedure was complete. Yuma thanked him for his help. Eva then remarked that if the lich transferred the control authority to her, they would finally be finished with everything. However, she suddenly turned toward Yuma and asked if he had thought about what they were going to feed the child. Yuma replied that if it were him, things would be different. Since he was immortal, there would be no need to sacrifice anyone. He declared that he was fully prepared for that responsibility. The moment the lich heard the word, immortal, his interest was immediately piqued. Meanwhile, Eva looked genuinely impressed. She told Yuma that he was really going all out for someone who had originally been sent there to assassinate him. She admitted that she was impressed. In fact, she found the situation a little intriguing herself. Yuma explained that he simply couldn't live with himself if he abandoned that child. Eva smiled and said she already knew. After all, it had been exactly the same when Yuma first saw her. Then she turned toward the lich and requested that he hand over the control authority. To their surprise, the lich refused. Both Eva and Yuma were visibly disappointed. However, the lich calmly declared that he would retain the authority himself. Then he turned his gaze toward Eva. Finally, he made a demand. She was to hand over the immortal. Yuma. Eva and the lich stood face to face, with Yuma caught right between them. Completely confused, he had no idea what was happening. Eva dismissed the situation as a bad joke, but the lich immediately fired back, asking if she had gotten so old that she could no longer hear properly. That single comment hit a nerve. Before the argument could escalate further, Yuma stepped in and asked the lich if he actually knew him. The answer was yes. But Eva didn't care. What did that have to do with handing Yuma over? The lich calmly explained that an immortal human was an incredibly valuable asset. With Yuma by his side, the amount of flesh and bone he would need to consume to survive would drop dramatically. Then the lich made an offer. He revealed that he studied ancient magic in his previous life. If Yuma joined him, he will share everything he knew. But Eva immediately cut in. According to her, what she could offer was far more valuable than the vampire's so-called knowledge. And there was no way she would sit back and let someone steal Yuma from her. The tension rose instantly. Trying to calm things down, Yuma suggested that the lich simply travel with them. But the answer came back immediately. Absolutely not. And just when things couldn't get any more chaotic, another problem arrived. Nearby, Davis noticed the commotion. Assuming an intruder had appeared, he decided to strengthen the smoke screen protecting the area. A small bell rang. Moments later, thick fog swallowed the surroundings. Elsewhere, the three summoned heroes noticed the fog growing denser. Katomi stepped forward and opened her book. She called upon Ariel. A small fairy emerged, and with a powerful arrow blast, the entire smoke screen was blown away. Watching from a distance, even Davis looked impressed. He quickly approached Eva and Yuma, informing them that unexpected visitors had arrived. Yuma's heart sank. At first, he wondered if it was the church. Then he saw them. The three heroes. And they had shown up at the worst possible moment. Frustrated, Yuma immediately called out to Eva and the Lich, proposing a plan. Outside, the heroes prepared to move. Meanwhile, Eva and the Lich reached an agreement. Whoever carried out Yuma's idea first would be the winner. With that settled, both sides got ready for battle. Takuya entrusted support duties to Katomi. She began chanting, calling upon the spirits of light to grant protection. Then Keita stepped forward. And he wasn't interested in talking. Declaring that it was payback time, he charged straight at Eva. As he rushed in, he unleashed high-level pyro magic, Inferno. A raging cyclone of flames engulfed Eva. Keita smirked. After all, fire was supposed to be effective against the undead. For a moment, he thought he had already won. Then a voice spoke from behind him. It was Eva. The burning figure had only been a decoy. Keita spun around and attacked instantly, thrusting his spear forward. Eva caught it with her bare hand. Effortlessly. Then she mocked him, pointing out that she had already gotten behind him twice. Keita's expression twisted with irritation. Who exactly did she think she was looking down on? Takuya tried to call out to his teammate. But before he could interfere, another figure stepped forward. And with a calm declaration he stopped Takuya in his tracks. If Takuya wanted a fight, then the Lich would be his opponent. Takuya slammed his sword into the ground and cast high-level glacial magic, Frozen Shadow. A massive wave of ice erupted from beneath the battlefield. But the attack didn't last long. To Takuya's shock, a thick substance began melting the ice almost instantly. The Lich had already countered with Death Summon, Poison Slime. With complete confidence, he reminded Takuya that ice meant nothing if it could be melted. Then the Lich shifted his attention toward Katomi. Why not take her on as well? The moment he spoke, undead creatures began crawling out of the ground behind her. It looked like she was trapped. But suddenly, giant vines burst from the earth and formed a protective shield around her. Dryad had answered her call. Katomi quickly thanked the spirit for the save. At that exact moment, another attack came flying toward the Lich from behind. He reacted instantly, raising a chunk of ice to block it. Takuya clicked his tongue. Going after his little sister had been a mistake. Meanwhile, Yuma watched everything unfold from the safety of the building. To his surprise, both Eva and the Lich were dominating the fight. Then something crashed against the window. An undead had slammed into it with enough force to make Yuma jump. Yet somehow, it couldn't get through. The windows were open. So why wasn't it entering? Davis calmly explained that the building's defenses against outside attacks were nearly flawless. Relieved, Yuma thanked him. But Davis wasn't finished. Excusing himself to strengthen the defenses even further, he gave Yuma one final warning. Spirits could still enter from outside. So he shouldn't let his guard down. The comment left Yuma puzzled. And behind him, hidden among the curtains, something quietly began to move. Outside, Takuya assessed the battlefield. The Lich was stronger than anything he had faced before. Even worse, Keita wasn't going to last much longer at this rate. Then, right between Takuya and the Lich, a massive tree suddenly erupted from the ground. Katomi smiled. Mission accomplished. It was their chance to escape. Takuya immediately praised her quick thinking and rushed over to Keita, who was still locked in battle with Eva. He told him it was time to leave. But Keita wasn't having it. Furious, he grabbed Takuya by the collar and demanded that he stay out of his way. Takuya reminded him of the warning he gave before they arrived. He told him not to let his personal grudge take control. They could always come back another day. But Keita refused to listen. Turning his back on Takuya, he unleashed high-level pyro magic, Phoenix. A gigantic flaming phoenix appeared overhead. Even Eva looked surprised. The next second, Keita leaped onto the blazing creature. Seeing him retreat, Eva couldn't resist mocking him. After starting the fight, was he really going to run away now? Keita exploded in anger. He shouted for her to shut up and swore that next time, he would burn her to ashes. Then the heroes finally withdrew. Watching them disappear, the Lich simply noted that they had escaped. Eva scoffed. According to her, none of them had any guts. She even joked that she should have brainwashed Keita after exhausting him. The Lich immediately objected. Doing that would have violated the terms of Yuma's proposal. Eva shot back that he had been considering killing them and turning them into puppets anyway. So he wasn't exactly in a position to talk about fairness. Their argument continued for only a moment. Because suddenly, Eva noticed something was wrong. The battle was over. The heroes were gone. But so was Yuma. And the moment she realized it, everything changed.